welcome to Trusty Chords, the podcast which aims to celebrate music and those that create it. There's no denying that the Adelaide music scene is one which is equally small and large. Small in the sense of its physical size, but large in just how far and wide its influence reaches thanks to the talented, welcoming people who comprise it. One of those people is Jason Katsaras, a musician whose influence over the last decade is still felt despite his current absence from his hometown. If you've been a regular of the classic SA venues, then you very well might have seen him as a member of bands like Burnside Mums, Dead Roo or Big Town. Needless to say, he's been around the place and he's a familiar face throughout the city of churches. For the last couple of years, he's been working on a new project, one called Hard Rubbish. I'd be lying if I said it was anything less than the stellar quality we're used to receiving from Jason, and it's yet another project in a long list of Adelaide artists I wholly recommend. This week, Jason is releasing a new single called 16 Waltz, and it's the sort of thing you need to be adding to your current playlist wherever you are. Fittingly, Jason is also my guest on this week's podcast, which serves as a perfect opportunity for me to ask all the typical Adelaide questions. No, not exactly which school did you go to, but pretty close. Anyway, I strongly urge you to check out Hard Rubbish's new single 16 Waltz, and once you're done giving that a spin, have a listen to our chat, and I'll see you at the end of the episode for some general housekeeping. Jason Katsaras, thank you very much for joining this episode of Trusty Chords.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, I would assume that outside of Adelaide and South Australia, your name might not hold quite that much cachet just yet. So for those who don't recognise your name or your voice, could you give me a quick few words on who you are and why we're chatting today?
Yeah, sure. My name's Jason Katsaras, and I've played in bands for many years outside of everything else. But predominantly that's been in Adelaide, which was from about the age of 18. And then through till now, I still try and play there as much as I can. But I've been moving around the last sort of 18 months, which has been a little difficult in that I've left my original scene or music support network in that respect. But I played in numerous bands there, and then and have continued to play music interstate since. But Adelaide will always be my home. But yeah, I played in my first sort of coming of age band was called Burnside Mums, which was a sort of rock punk, angry young man music band. And then moved into a band called Dead Roo, which was a little bit more chilled out, a bit more folky, and probably more the direction that I've stayed in since. And then I've also played in a bit of a post-punk outfit called Big Town, which has also been a lot of fun. And that's, we've toured I've toured with them more than any other band. Unfortunately, Dead Roo was kind of hampered by COVID right when we were sort of moving into that space. But yeah, that's me.
I really enjoyed that little recap because it actually answers a few of my questions that I had coming up. So I appreciate that. Now I can get to the more, important questions, I guess.
Great.
But where I love to start with this sort of podcast is I always love to sort of ask people about where that love of music first started. So for you, Jason, do you have a recollection of your earliest memory of when music first resonated with you?
To be honest, I'd say the resonating with me would be like when I was probably 6 years old, and I used to just like grab a CD, put it in the stereo, showing my age. But it's before iPods, I guess. And I just used to get mum's CDs, put it in the stereo, and just dance to like the Wiggles and the Hooly Doolies, but I would just do that on my own, and just vibe out, I guess, in my jocks as a kid. So that's probably the first connection with music, but it was very much just a fun, I was just having a little boogie. But then since then, my earliest sort of verging on adult connection with music was probably quite embarrassingly, some would say embarrassingly, but I guess I got really into Muse in the early days, back in the day when I was like a teenager. I guess they fulfilled the teenage angst and sort of emo spirit that I had vested in me. And the old stuff was very good at the time. And my brother and I used to we just obsessed over them. I remember seeing them in Adelaide at the entertainment centre, and it was like the best day of my life. Since then, thankfully, my taste has developed much more, well beyond that. But they're probably the first band that I like obsessed over, and I still think their first few albums are great.
They are solid records, that's for sure. I mean, I think I definitely went through that sort of growth as well, where I think everyone who was into like alternative rock music goes through the two stages of their life where they like Muse and then they realize that they're growing up. But not to offend any of the Muse fans out there, because they do decent work, but
they did.
Yeah, they did decent work.
They're like a parody of themselves these days.
It's a little bit of a shame. They had so much really strong potential, I feel, but I'm really worried I'm going to attract the ire of all the Muse fans.
You'd have to be careful on this podcast, I can imagine.
Yeah.
You've got to toe the line and try and keep everyone happy. I mean, music's subjective, and not to take the piss out of any Muse fans. Maybe you really like their new work, and good on you if you do.
You can, if you can admit that, well, good for you for being so brave. So you mentioned that your brother before, for example, so he's also quite a good musician. So did you have a particularly musical family then? Like, because it makes me wonder if your folks were really flying the flag for creativity in the household.
Yeah, I think Mum always pushed Thomas and I. Thomas being in Twine, who are doing great things at the moment. Arguably, he's almost picked up the baton. Since I've left town, he's making sure that the Katsaras name is still
it can be
still
only
out
one.
There. But yeah, that mum particularly was always pushing us to like do guitar lessons and stuff. But I don't think it was really. I mean, I can't speak for Thomas. So I don't think for either of us it really clicked until after school, and we were like enjoying music out of an educational sense that that either of us really got interested in it. I think. Something about lessons and the sort of structured, making music seem like a chore, kind of maybe kept me away from it for a while. But yeah, my parents just love music, but they're not really players themselves, but they just love it, and so they would always put music on. And my grandfather, my papa, similarly would just always put music on a CD. My uncle was very musical, so we definitely had musical people around us, and people who love music. But it's not like some of my friends whose parents are literally professional musicians. I can't. We didn't have that, but which it honestly feels like strange that that we suddenly, just out of nowhere, almost just got really into it. But it's great. And my parents were never, anything but supportive. So very lucky.
Now, you grew up in Adelaide, correct?
Correct.
Yes. So I don't know if we actually said this beforehand. So I also grew up in Adelaide. I'm from Adelaide these days, based in Melbourne. But I always like to ask people, well, especially folks from Adelaide, because, people from Adelaide always have the standard questions of where'd you go to school and that sort of thing. But I love to chat to Adelaide musicians and say, for you, what was the music scene like? Were you able to head out to a lot of gigs and really get immersed in what turned into a very fertile music scene?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I sort of started getting into music at such a great time, and it still probably has such an impact on me. The bands that were coming up when I was first going out, and that included West Everton and Bad Dreams, and I thought they were so cool, and they are still very cool. But it was just great to have those guys, sort of showing what can be done, and then meeting them later on and just realizing that they're just completely normal people. But yeah, there was that. I guess there was a real, maybe it was sort of 2018, 19. There was just a really great Oz rock renaissance where Violent Soho was the biggest band in the country, and the radio was just playing lots of rock. And it was just, I mean, maybe it's changed now. It seems to have, but yeah, there was just a very fertile pub rock scene happening at the time, and I was very, you know, able to get along to those things. And then you also had great bands like Workhorse, who've got like a new generation or new iteration now, but they were around at the time. And then I was able to sort of um, listen to more bands that came out of a place called Format, and then who played the Metro. This, yeah, as soon as I stuck my maybe that's a bad. So as soon as I sunk my teeth, sorry, is a better way to put it, into it, I was very satisfied with the range of artists that there was at my disposal to go and see. So, you know, I loved it.
Yeah.
And so many great bands
Oh,
that
absolutely.
were around then.
Absolutely. I mean, I think my time in the Adelaide music industry, Adelaide music scene, sorry, was really sort of around the 2012 through 2015 sort of time. That's when I was really going to gigs like every week. I mean, you mentioned Bad Dreams in West Everton. One of my favorite gigs was probably seeing one of West Ev's earliest gigs where they supported Bad Dreams at the Exeter. And
Yeah,
it just,
wow.
like you think of it now, and it's just sort of like, I think there was 20 people there or something. Both of those bands play the Exeter now. It's like, there'll be a lineup at the door sort of thing.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't even think they could. I think
yeah.
they'd shut the place down.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
especially West Ebb. I mean, you have the band in there. There's no room for an audience. There's a lot of people in there. Um,
exactly.
but I guess that is sort of a decent little segue because I mean, we mentioned. Gee, I'm going to try a very tenuous segue here. You mentioned the likes of West Everton. Now, the likes of Ray from West Everton used to be in the band called P, and they had a song called Burnside Mums, and you were in a band called Burnside Mums. So, that's a very laborious segue. But so you said that was your first band, was it?
Yeah, yeah, that
So,
was
how did that start for you?
um I guess I was just already becoming very interested in music and going to gigs and suddenly knowing who was out there and what to see, and I just really wanted to get involved. And then I think I met a friend of mine, Christian Andriotti, who now lives interstate, and I haven't seen him in years actually, but he was also keen, and it was just that typical classic gas bagging thing, like, oh, let's start a band. And half the time that never happens, or most of the time, if you're out and you mention that you want to do some music with someone, it just the unspoken rule that it's never spoken of again.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, we did, and which was great. And we had a mutual love of like a lot of the same music, including just I guess yeah, we were very much about that pub rock sound, which was big at the time, and we still adore, but very much we're just going for I guess a bit rough around the edges rock and roll, and that's what he was into. That's what I was into. Luckily, he was good friends with Dylan and Levi Cooper, who
Oh
are
yes.
currently in Raccoon City, um, and they're just legends. But they honestly, like, endlessly grateful to them because they kind of just walked us through the whole experience and showed us how to be in a band. Like, literally, Levi used to bring his pedals and amps and just be like, here, use these pedals. That's what this one does. This is what that one does. Put your guitar into that lead. There's the microphone. Um, and just made the whole process so easy. And I don't know if I ever could have, really gotten into music without, honestly, like that support. It was amazing. And I know that they were doing it a lot for their friend Christian, who had brought his new friend Jason along. But it was still such a beautifully lovely thing for someone to do for someone they didn't know that well. And so, as I said, it endlessly grateful to
I
those
mean,
two.
they are some. They're a couple of absolute champions. I mean, I actually. This is actually a story that so Tim Edwards, who is currently the guitarist in Raccoon City, I
Uh-huh.
went to see Raccoon City, the Enigma Bar, probably in 2014. No, it would have been 2013, I think. And I went with Tim, and it was a very weird that like 8 years later, he's now the guitarist in the band, and I think he credits me going along to the gig with him as being in the band. But I'm just like, I think it's the fact that you're a good musician, and you've got like Dylan and Levi Cooper there. You've got two
Yeah, I
amazing
think
musicians who are just so welcoming to good talent.
ability is probably something to do with it, Tim. So if he ever listens to this, he's great.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
absolutely. No, it's. I mean, Adelaide's such a great, fertile music scene with such welcoming people as well. It is something I do actually sort of quite miss compared to being in Melbourne, where it feels a lot larger and you feel like you're more in a crowd as opposed to being around friends.
yeah, a bit more impersonal, I can imagine.
Exactly. So after Burnside Mums, was it Dead Roo that you were in then?
Yeah, yeah. So Deadroo, I guess, sort of was happening for a little while. It was happening parallel to Burnside Mums at the same time. Um, Eventually, Burnside Mums ended. Deadroo was my only sort of project. Um, but yeah, I think there's probably like two years of Burnside Mums before Deadroo started, and then yeah, that just kind of started similarly with a mutual friend, and I guess I was just growing up and meeting lots of people, and met a mutual friend, Jess Johns. We sort of just both bonded over the fact that we liked country music, and we were like, let's start a band. And I was like, no, I'm not letting this go. And so we made a, we made it happen. I like invited her over. We had a jam, and it's it was pretty awkward at the time. We were young, we didn't know each other. I was like just a socially awkward guy. I was at my parents' house, but we had a really nice practice. And then we invited a friend. Trying to think who was first. Probably Stuart, into the fold, and then Hamish, and then suddenly we had this like super cute little like family feeling band, like this. We're just a little gang, and it was really really fun. And then from there we just yeah, just kept working on it. It sort of didn't end up being very country. It's probably a bit more indie rock, or just quite palatable and jangly rock or pop rock. Yeah, you could. I mean, take a listen and see what you think. But yeah, and it ended up being really good and was really well received. I think people just really liked the songs, hopefully, but they also, I think, they like having like um, often Jess and I would sort of sing together, or um, she would sing a bit, I'd sing a bit, and I think that dynamic was cool, and people enjoyed that, and yeah, and we had a really really good time for a few years.
And but was that the one that was impacted by COVID, you said?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I sort of I put COVID to it personally. I
Yeah.
mean, you could probably you could ask the others, but basically we were just playing for years, and we actually had a tour booked that would have been like a national tour, and it sort of was due to happen within a month of um, of COVID. So it was probably due to happen in March,
All
or
right.
sometime after March 2020, and then that sort of just, yeah, I guess that just kind of blew the air out of our tires, or just took the wind out of our sail. And then I just don't think the band ever really recovered from that, and everyone sort of took the downtime to pursue their own projects, which is so fine and great. And then yeah, we that kind of just it just fizzled. But I don't think there's any bad blood there. I think it's
Yeah.
just these things happen, and the pandemic impacted everyone in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, because I'm fairly sure, and I was trying to look it up just on my phone, and I couldn't quite remember, but I'm fairly sure I wrote an article about Dead Roo back on Tone Deaf back in the
Oh,
day,
true.
and then because I remember I definitely did a little article on Jess Johns, it throughout COVID over on Rolling Stone though, so but I sort of wish I did something on Dead Roo, so I could have actually made it sound like I was a lot more supportive than just doing a podcast about your music,
No,
but.
that's fine.
But so obviously I am sort of like aware of time, so I do want to sort of ask go on to your current project that you're working on. But between Dead Roo and Hard Rubbish, was it Big Town that you were working with for a bit?
Yeah, and again, the sort of a concurrent thing as well, where the Big Town and Dead Red were definitely happening at the same time for a while. Um, and then eventually Dead Red ended. It was kind of just Big Town. Um, Big Town is probably the most loose. Uh, how do I explain it? It's like the loosest creative project out of all three. in that it's kind of just silly and um, noisy and yeah, I guess just quirky. I suppose something you probably have to listen to get. But that was with Ricky Olbeck, who I had played in Burnside Mums with, as I had enlisted him as a guitarist, and then we'd obviously stayed friends and stayed very much in touch, and we're still very good. He's one of my best mates to this day. And
Musician too.
yeah, he's a ripper. Um, and yeah, I guess with him and then my friend Alicia, we sort of started initially a very small band, and then and just kind of went from there. And I think initially the onus was on us, not the onus, sorry, but the idea was that uh, I think Ricky really wanted to get Alicia or to help Alicia play music and to give them that leg up, I suppose. But it wasn't like um, out of charity or something. Like we really wanted to play with them, and we did, and we had a really lovely time. And then that's kind of and Big Town kind of just comes and goes now. If we're all in the same city at the same time, we'll play a show. We did a couple of tours at the end of last year and the start of this year, which was my first proper experience of interstate touring, which is crazy after all these years, but things obviously got in the way. But yeah, did like Sydney, Wollongong, Melbourne, and it was very fun. So
And
yeah.
then currently you've got Hard Rubbish as a project. So what's the story here? Because I know that you first had a single, I think it was in 2022 with the song Something, and then Evergreen back in January this year. But they both see you sort of working with some different musicians along the way. So is it sort of more of like a solo project where you work with other artists, or is there a different way that you sort of look at it?
I think it started as very much like my idea of a band because I was just looking for the next project. And this was in Adelaide. Basically, Deborah had wrapped up. Obviously, Burnside Mums had wrapped up a long time before. Big Town was probably not giving me enough music or enough time to play music and enough gigs. And I had a lot of songs that I thought were a bit more personal and just mine that I wanted to put out, but didn't really want to have to make the jump into calling something, just Jason Katsaras, because that feels, I guess I'm a bit shy or just afraid of being a bit uh, self-aggrandizing. But so it started with a band, and then that was with Jesse Davidson, Bernadette Wright from who's in Colorblind and also a legend. Shout out Burns, and James Hascard and Sam Kolesnik. So, like, just had luckily enough after playing music for so long and being able to meet so many people who are also lovely. I was very lucky to be able to kind of take my pick of like my favorite people, and those who were available were able to just jump in, and it was meant to be a standalone band. But then I moved to Queensland early last year, probably like February, March last year. And then I didn't really want to have to start again, I guess, project wise. And so I've just kind of shifted my mindset to the fact that it is a solo project, just under an ambiguous name. And so therefore in Townsville, North Queensland last year, I was able to just get a couple of musicians to play with me again. And that was just a different iteration of Hard Rubbish. I've played here I'm in Victoria currently, and I've played here with Ricky and another friend of mine, George, and that was, I guess, the regional Victorian iteration of Hard Rubbish. But yeah, it's essentially a solo project, I guess.
And then is it this week that we've actually got a new single coming from you as well? Is that right?
Yeah. So sorry, I didn't even answer your question before about the working with different people, but yeah, this latest single is one that I've recorded with Tom Matheson of Swell
Another
Records,
champion as well.
another champion, lovely human, and he's Junk Harmony and formerly Siamese. great musician, lovely human, and has been such an amazing support to me, particularly while I've been interstate. And like the fact that he still cares and wants to hear my stuff or help me get it out is just perplexing to me, but obviously very, very grateful. But yeah, the last two singles were recorded with Ricky Harbeck. And Ricky played on the first two singles, like a few instruments in both of them. I think he might have done drums in both of them. But this next single, and then potentially if there's another single after this, or whether it's just the next releases after that, are all recorded with Tom Matheson. So they are different, I guess, different sound. But yeah, all songs that I had at the time. And I guess I didn't have the chance to block out a week of recording with the same musicians and record an album or an EP in one go. I've just kind of did it on spare weekends with different people. And so they might all sound a little different, but I think it's just life. I'm just glad I got them recorded.
Yeah, and it's also good to know that working with Tom, you're in safe hands. So that's always good. Working with anyone really. I mean, it sounds like you surround yourself with some amazing musicians. So it sounds like anything that you do, if you're working with other people, it can't be bad.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm very, very lucky to know some very lovely people. And the best thing about Adelaide is that whenever I pop home, it's like no time has passed. I mean, I've only been away for 18 months, but it feels like a long time. But whenever I go back, it's musically and socially, it's like no time has passed. So
Yeah.
very, very lovely.
And as a bit of a last question before we get to our final segment, I should ask, considering that the other bands have been a little bit more, I guess the things like Dead Roo, unfortunately, there was a bit of a fizzle out there. And then like Big Town is still a bit of a ongoing thing, but only very casually. Do you think that Hard Rubbish will be more of an ongoing project you focus on? Or are you sort of more happy to let the future sort of remain a bit unwritten and how it all plays out?
I think like I've got a selection of songs that are written, recorded, mixed, and mastered, and I'm super excited to get those out. Hopefully by at the very latest by the end of the year. But yeah, I mean, if Hard Rubbish is just if it's a vessel for my songwriting, then I don't see it stopping anytime soon, because I don't plan on stopping playing music. I've been playing myself. I'm in Albury Wodonga, and I've been playing myself in a lot of towns around here. I played in Beechworth, played in Howlong, which is a tiny town in actually regional New South Wales, because it's just on the border. But as long as I keep playing and writing and lining up, hopefully more Adelaide and Melbourne shows, then I don't see why I will stop it. Hopefully it can just, I think the difficulty in being pulled out of the Adelaide gig economy is that I don't have a regular venue or scene that I can play in and garner new listeners. I'm quite reliant on people who either just find me online, or those who remember me from Adelaide, or those who remember me from Townsville for that matter. But I think I'm just trying to navigate that, I suppose, and hoping to just keep playing in Adelaide. I mentioned had another interview a little while ago, and I mentioned that I'm hoping to play again in Adelaide before the end of the year, which I'm keen to do, and just
Amazing. Well, if we ever happen to see you in Melbourne, I will definitely be there, because I amazingly have never actually seen any of your projects live. I've seen almost every other Adelaide band except anything that you've done, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to change that very, very quickly.
Yeah, well, I mean, keep an eye out. I'll hopefully, line something up in future. But we would love to have you.
Most definitely. Well, I think we should, in the interest of time, get down to the portion of this podcast from which its namesake is derived. So, Trusty Chords, that's the name, sees me follow the 1, 3, and 5 structure of a standard chord, and I ask you about one artist that has impacted you, 3 albums that have influenced you, and 5 songs you can always turn to. As I always say, it's a bit wordy, but I'm going to make it happen. So, first question for you here, Jason. Who is the one artist that has inspired you the most, whether it be personally or creatively?
Yeah, I think I'd probably, and again, I think we spoke off air about how hard of a question this is. But if I had to point to a band that has proven to me just how good um, a original Australian band can be, and how much depth it can have, and um, how many albums they can put out, and how much storytelling can be involved, and how noisy it can be. It'd probably be the Drones, who just have always just their discography is just unbelievable, and there's just so much to sink your teeth into. And then obviously what uh, Gareth is doing in Tropical Flux Form now is awesome too. But I guess growing up, that's what I turned to and listened to was the Drones, and yeah, they're just fantastic. And that I can only dream of having 1% of the lyrical creativity that Gareth Lydiard has
Yeah, absolutely.
with his projects. It's just unbelievable. And I think that would probably be the same for my brother as well. I think I mentioned earlier that we played used to listen to Muse, and then we sort of, I think, over time both made a very big 180 towards the Drones and listened quite heavily to them growing up as well. Um, but yeah, love the Drones, and would love to see some of those older songs played again. I know that's sort of besides the point of people moving on to new projects,
Or
but I love them.
I mean, funnily enough, I've actually been in a real kick of their song Shark Fin Blues this last week, and I don't know
Oh,
if you, it's an amazing
so
song, but
good.
I don't know if you happen to remember. I think it was 2009. It would have been. There was a poll of Australian musicians, and they voted that the best written Australian song ever. And you really break it down, and you just think Gareth is really working on another level. And
Yeah.
it's absolutely stunning. I once actually ran into him at a food works in Melbourne, and I really wanted to say to him, Gareth, I love your song. Then I realized he's going to a party. I'm wearing tracky dacks. I don't need to have this conversation now. But it even sort of just someone like him, like an amazing songwriter. I felt almost like awestruck that I'm just thinking this is the guy that writes songs like that. He's a true genius. I feel.
Mm.
That could be. I
I
mean,
know.
I don't know if that's a controversial thing to say. He's a genius, but I think he is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's well and truly earned genius level acclaim for sure. I actually met one of the guitarists from the Drones in Melbourne recently,
You're right.
really drunkenly at the old bar. And I was with Ricky, and we met the guitarist who played on all the albums up until Gala Mill.
Yeah, right.
Um, and it was just like I was awestruck then too. I was like, oh my God, I I love everything you've done. Um, Melbourne's crazy like that. I feel like coming from Adelaide, where I used to listen to all those Melbourne bands, and then knowing that they actually live in that area, they're real people. It's
Mm.
crazy. I mean, I guess I was pretty Melbourne influenced for a long time in terms of some of the great Australian sort of folk and and um, and rock coming out of at the time.
Actually, it's always funny that you mentioned the old bar because I played a gig at the old bar last night actually,
Oh wow.
and then only it was a few years ago I was at the old bar watching. I can't remember the name of the band right now, but in the audience was Paul Dempsey from Something for Kate, and I'm just thinking, you come to these gigs too. It felt so weird, like you just had you're suddenly rubbing shoulders with these people that you've admired. It's a really strange feeling for a musician, I feel, but
It's a really strange feeling for someone from Adelaide, I
oh
think,
yeah, of course, yeah,
is the difference, maybe. But yeah, it's
yeah.
cool. It's cool.
And then next up, what are three albums that have impacted you the most? This could be albums that you're always throwing on or something that was integral to your musical evolution.
Yeah. In my notes here, I've got um like I'm just gonna have to say that I'm just gonna embrace the cringe because
Totally
well
fine.
not the cringe, but like I'm quite happy to just say the most formative album. Doesn't mean that I think it's the best, one of the best albums ever written, but formative for me. And this is also, what, in hindsight, it's not cringe at all, but like Hungry Ghost by Violent Soho growing up was like amazing,
Mm.
changed my life. Had it in the car, listened to it front to back, million times. The ambience in some of the songs, comparative to how heavy some of the songs were, like it was just the time and the place. It was all perfect. Loved it. Um,
Absolutely.
and I guess, growing up a bit more, well, not growing up more. I regret saying embrace the cringe, but I guess, the purpose of the question is more based around in what's influenced you the most. And
Yes.
so, not the album I'm listening to the most now, but that was, as I said, probably the most formative. Um, but then otherwise, Harvest by Neil Young
Mm.
is maybe on the other spectrum side of my musical taste, but have just again also listened to that back to front a million times. And the sound, the production, the story of how it was recorded in a barn on Neil Young's property. I watched the film with some friends a couple of years ago, with all this found footage of Neil, and it's just so beautiful, um, and just uh, endlessly amazing in its sound and depth and um, style that was so different to anything else. It's got its own flavor somehow that is so different to every other album I've ever heard.
There's also something very comforting about Neil Young, I feel. Even his hard rock stuff, it feels very comforting in a different way than his like more, I guess, intimate stuff does as well. But to me, he always feels
Mm,
like a very comforting artist.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, yeah, and I guess I tried to um, sort of always sort of grappling between like, do I want to write songs like Harvest or do I want to write songs like Hungry Ghost? But
Why
some
not
I'm
both?
off. Yeah, well, I feel like I always land somewhere in the middle. But yeah, maybe the older I get, maybe the more I lean towards the softer stuff. But
Yeah.
sometimes I just want to put some distortion on and play loud, and that's fun too. It's a lot harder to do without a band though. So I think living alone or separated from a music scene, it's probably been seemed a lot more achievable to write and play sort of country folk songs. Um, and also, it's probably a bit moodier. It kind of fits the setting a bit more playing country out here because it kind of feels like I should be. Um, and was it three albums?
Yeah. So that was two, I think, Hungry Ghost and then Harvest. So we got one left.
Yeah, probably the last one I'd say is Calendar Days by Dick Diver,
Oh
um,
yes.
which was again a massive influence on me. I think I bought the record when I was 20 or quite young. It was one of the first like of my own records that I could buy for myself that I didn't just borrow from mum's old collection from the 80s. And she had some great stuff. But that was my first sort of album from a new band. And I just listened to it back to front endlessly at my old house in Rutherglen, sorry, in Collinswood in Adelaide. I used to just put it on, open all the windows, and sit in the backyard and just pour over it. The sort of what's the word? The unpretentious Australian sort of suburban folk sound that they produced was exactly what I wanted to do with Deadaroo. I'm not sure if we got there, but yeah, I just found it really inspiring, and I think the that really earnest, honest songwriting, and I think maybe the Australianness of it, without being some cultural cringe, patriotic sort of, without that's not what I'm trying to do, but I guess it just resonated with me really, really well because it just um, felt like home, or I guess it just hit home a lot more than like so many other artists that I had grown up listening to. I was like, this just sounds like super, yeah, close to home. Still love that album to this day.
It's a brilliant album. Actually, I think all three of those albums, I think the one thing I have to say in response to them, I will evoke the words of Von Soho when I say, hell fuck yeah, that's a really good trio of records you picked there, mate. Um,
Oh, thank you.
so lastly, I'd love to know the 5 songs you can always turn to, whether it be for comfort, for excitement, anything at all, your 5 trusty songs.
Um, 5 trusty songs. What I have here written down is first one I'd say is "Forget the Flowers" by Wilco,
Mm.
which is a great song. I loved it. Then I found a live version at the Troubadour on like a deluxe edition of the album, and I loved it even more because that version is a bit more jangly, a bit more playful, and it's just a great country rock song. I'm
Absolutely.
such a fan, and I've sort of since sort of maybe that was maybe one of my like first introductions into Wilco, and I've since been a big fan of theirs ever since, and Jeff Tweedy's solo stuff as well.
Oh yeah.
Very good stuff.
So the live version is the one that you would always turn to, is it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would recommend the live version. I have thrashed it though, so I think sometimes I need a break.
Yeah, that's
Um,
fair. You burnt yourself
but
out a
then
bit.
yeah, I come back to it, and I refound the live version recently. Just like, all right, well, this is so good. Um, Second one, I would say, is a pretty niche song that's actually not on any streaming services. So whenever I want to listen to it, I have to search it on YouTube. But um, Any Day Now by Bedwet and Bad Boys,
Oh
which is
yes.
just like I think a Melbourne band. I was probably too young to, well, I was just in Adelaide and I missed them. I think they started playing again recently,
I
maybe.
think I heard that actually, but I've been waiting for them to come back to streaming services actually because they were there for a while and then I think they just lapsed or something.
Oh,
But
just they're so good. And
mm,
that song is just amazing. That song is maybe that's probably I guess if I wanted to make Dead Roo sound like Dick Diver, then I wanted Burnside Mums to sound like that song and Bedouin and Bad Boys because it's just like the guitars are so raw and like pointy, and the vocals are so like rough, but it's just really uh it's just it's what's the word? God, I used to write a bit of like music reviews back in the day, and I've lost all my adjectives that you normally turn to.
mate,
Um,
I'm writing, I'm a journalist who works every day and I still forget my adjectives, so don't you worry at all.
oh, cathartic. That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very cathartic. The vocals are just they're just awesome, and I just loved it, and I love that song, and it's just a real pick me up. It really just gets me going. It's just yeah, hard. Yeah, it's hard to put to words, but
I
it
get
for
that.
whatever reason it just tickles the right bone in my brain, and it's just a real G up. Um, but I can continue.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
On the other end of the spectrum, I think Caitlin Harnett and the Pony Boys had an album a couple of years ago now. It was maybe their self-titled album, but there's a song on that called "Pissing on Everything,"
Mm.
and it is just heartbreaking. And whenever I've been, I guess, not doing so well, it just puts to words that so well. If I'm ever, not feeling great, a bit down in the dumps, a bit depressed, a bit anxious. Something about this song, "Pissing on Everything," which is mostly just Caitlin, uh, not too much of a band backing there, it's just perfect, and beautiful. Could almost bring you to tears. How
Really? Yeah.
yeah, it's dark, but it's just fantastic, and I couldn't speak more highly of it. And I couldn't speak more highly of them. They're a great band. I saw them in Tamworth a couple of years ago. It must have been 2021, I
Right.
think. I saw them in Tamworth. They played like every night for a week, and they're just so great and just great musicians, and they're all lovely people as well. They definitely they definitely get on it. They put us to shame. Uh, they were just big party animals, but very fun people. Um,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've been very keen to actually see them live. I know that they toured with Bad Dreams a couple of years ago, but they didn't play Victoria. And
Oh,
I
bugger.
and I remember thinking, you know what, I was really looking forward to that, but sadly, I'm gonna have to put it on the list for another time. But
Yeah. Well,
yeah, no,
I'm sure
very very keen for it.
they'll play again. They're just fantastic. They're the perfect perfect blend of I guess country and rock.
Hmm.
That's yeah, that's sort of where I've been. I mean, just country generally is probably where I've just been leading my musical taste towards for the last couple of years, and it's not stopping. My mate told me the other day, he was like, "Oh, I thought that was just a phase, and you're still listening to it." And I was like, "Yeah, it's not changing. It's
I,
just what
there's
I
a
like."
reason I like it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So we've got two left. What are your other two songs?
Um, I've got here "Hog of the Forsaken" by Michael Hurley, who is such a sweet songwriter. Has in his 80s, I think now, but been around for obviously a long, long time,
Mm.
and just writes really clever, cute country folk songs. Often it's bedroom recorded or recorded pretty DIY. But yeah, that song is just amazing because it sounds like it could be an Irish folk song from the 1700s, but it's not, and it's brilliant. There's also a band version of the song that I can also somehow only find on YouTube, as it was part of the Deadwood soundtrack, this TV
Oh
show,
right, okay, yeah.
um, which my brother and I have actually been watching. It's a great show, but yeah, that song is just uh, like I think I'd love to play songs that sound a bit older than they are in future. Like I'd love to write a song that sounds like it's from 1850. There's a lot of like old towns around where I'm living at the moment. I just think it'd be so cool to have something that sounds of the era that the building was built in, like
Yeah.
Gold Rush Victoria, and just so that song's really cool, and I always come back to it.
And I also think this is totally unrelated. I think Michael Hurley used to play football for Essendon. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about because they're different people.
No, but
But
that is relevant because
it
if you
is
Google Michael Hurley, you get one or the other. You get both.
exactly right. And we have one song left. What would that one be for you, Jason?
Um, I think that would be "Mellow My Mind" by Neil Young, which
Oh
was
yeah.
obviously not on Harvest, but just I can't explain how infectious that song was. It was actually probably it's ridiculous that it's something I've only heard in the last year. It's ridiculous because it's been around forever, and I just I Neil Young stuff was off Spotify for a while. Then I had his app, the Neil Young Archives app, so I could
Oh yeah.
listen to it. Then found myself not actually taking the time to swap over to listen to it there. And then he's back on streaming now, so I've been like trawling through, rediscovered this song, and um, yeah, it's just beautiful. It's kind of, I think it was written around the same time as Harvest, apparently, and sort of talks about the drug addiction and him losing a friend, which is heart wrenching
Mm.
and awful. Not something I actually have any experience with, luckily, but for whatever reason, it still is just so emotional and just is so powerful. And I like to play it, and I just love something. If I ever have a guitar and like 5 seconds free, I'll play it because it's just so beautiful, and it makes me really want to get a. I feel like I'm sound like I'm getting sponsored by YouTube here, but there's another great version of that, and it's only on YouTube, and it's him by himself with like a six-string banjo, as opposed to playing on a guitar, and it sounds amazing like that. Um, and every time I listen to that, I'm like, okay, got to get myself six-string banjo, and I think it'll be my next purchase when you get
That's
around to it.
That sounds like a plan. Well, I should thank our sponsors, YouTube, today. What I want to say is, Jason, I want to say thank you very much for your time today and for being part of the Trusty Chords podcast. Those were some amazing picks that you've chosen for us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the interest. And yeah, keep up the good work.
Thank you for listening to Trusty Chords. If you listened to this episode and enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you were able to take a few minutes to like, follow, share, and review this podcast on your preferred platform of choice. As always, there's no obligation, but I'm forever grateful if you do. If you're eager to follow along on social media, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. There's also a blog for this podcast on my own website, which is tylerjenke.com. That's tylerjenke/Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. That's where you'll find entries on each episode each week and a list of all the artists, albums, and 5 songs chosen by artists each week, along with the accompanying playlist too. You can also find a link to the Buy Me a Coffee platform where you can throw me a few dollars to keep this podcast running if you feel so inclined. As usual, thanks to everyone who continues to listen, message, or just support this podcast in any way. I'm forever grateful to hear from you all each week. Lastly, I need to thank Jason Katsaras for spending time with me this week for the podcast. I also need to thank Tom Matheson of Swirl Records for helping to organise the chat as well. But once again, thank you kindly for listening, and I hope to see you all again next week as I continue to celebrate music and those that create it.